You guys ready?
I'm ready.
You have any look on audio, Micah?
I downloaded one. It said in its description that you can choose between internal and connected microphones, but it seems like there's nothing in the preferences, and it's just recording from my microphone. We'll see.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's no better than your solution. I think yours would probably be better.
Right. Well, why don't you just go ahead and do it then? One further way to decentralize power away from Hero.
Yeah, like it. Cool.
Michael, do you want to take the lead on the? I think like today, what we're thinking about is getting into this document, really getting familiar with it, making some changes, and then dialing this thing down. Michael, since you have the most familiarity with it, you want to take the lead, bud?
Sure. Yeah. So we'll just get into it. A lot of the work that we've done in governance so far has basically just boiled down to deciding on our voting structure, which we want to do 1-to-1 DAOPunk NFTs with quadratic for multiple DAOPunks from the same wallet. And so that's great. That's a lot of work we went through to like explore all of the different options. And now we have a lot of different options that we've parsed through that we can return to if we ever find like we need them. But so to the extent of our governance doc so far is like very minimal as far as what we've actually agreed on so far. And we may have a lot more work to do discussing the working group model. And at least like what we've inherited this really excellent framework that Hero provided from the Writers Guild, but it's really tailored to the Writers Guild specifically, and I didn't really change it much other than kind of deleting things that were obviously irrelevant to us and replacing some of the words, but we need to like take a careful look at that working group and adapt it heavily to us. So that might be something that people interested can do offline, and we can return to that after people have sort of actually thought about it a little bit. I don't know how effective it would be to just kind of, spitball during this meeting if we haven't already given it some thought. But then the other thing right now that's relevant is this discussion that's been going on in the governance channel. I posted a little picture of what I've added, but it's in the document. So we can go over that. I basically tried to just boil it down to some of the key points, like some of the specific questions that we need to answer, as well as some ideas for sesh votes. And then we have this other idea for developing a protocol for meetings and how meetings happen. And that's kind of a new addition to the governance framework since last meeting. But yeah, it's pretty minimal at this stage, and if we want, I basically highlighted a question mark at the beginning of like every question that we need to answer for this governance framework to go through, so we can kind of just start parsing through those. Does anybody have any preferences for how we move forward in this meeting?
Let me just ask a couple high-level questions real quick. One, do we want to? I mean, there's really a lot here, right? You said it was simple, but I mean, there's if you look at it, there's a lot going on in this document, right?
I meant so. I think what is simple is what we have decided on so far. What we have figured out is very simple.
Correct. And so, what we've decided on so far by the soft consensus polls is simple. The stuff in here is, you're raising a lot of questions that are philosophical as well as technical, right? And so, I guess my initial question would be, it's going to take some time to work through this document generally, right? Even if we put async effort into it, it's still going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of community input, and it's going to take a lot of thought. And I wonder if it makes sense to push out, a simple, some like one iteration better than what we have right now, that gets us to quadratic, that gets a working model up, even if it's not perfect, but gets a working, because practically what I want to be able to do is like compensate working groups, right? Through Coordinate. But we can't do that until really we have a framework for it. We can do it informally, fine, right? But so I wonder if it makes sense to break this out into two different phases, essentially. Phase one is to get a governance document that reflects, the SOC consensus we've already decided, plus working groups, which is part of the SOC consensus. And then two, get into these really, deeper questions about, multi-sig elections and, all that stuff, which is going to be, it's going to take a little more work and it's going to need a lot more input from the community than we can imagine, right? And so, so I would think about that before we get going. It's like, are we happy with the one-to-one non-quadratic, soft working groups that aren't formalized and have no mechanism for compensation yet, versus, taking care of those, one iteration better than what we have, and then leaving, these more complex topics, for that third iteration, I guess. So I'm curious what you guys think about that.
Yeah, this document could become a long-term working document for our permanent governance framework, and then we continue to pass more interim governance frameworks. So we'd spin off another document where we try to have basically the quadratic voting, the quorum of 45 DAOPunks, and the most basic working group model that we can come up with. So we'd have a document on the side, and then we try to get that prepared for a snapshot vote.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. I think that makes more sense, honestly, just because it is clearly one step better than what we have, and it would allow for more egalitarian voting, a clear quorum plus compensation, right? Versus some of the stuff, like, it's going to take work, brother, which is great work, but this is like long-term work. This will be the ins and outs of how we spend, these governance meetings. How often, if we keep them weekly, great. But forever, how long we keep them, we're going to be working on this document for a long time. And to your point about whether you ever call it final or not, the governance framework is never final, right? So, if you're always working on making governance better, however you define better, it's never done, and so I don't know. My preference would be to get the one iteration better than what we have, and then continue to work on all of this stuff every week, or if we choose to meet every 2 weeks, whatever it is, going forward. So I'm easy. I'm open, like, totally.
NFTs that people have more than one or two, it has kind of less power for every NFT, stuff like that, right?
Yeah, more or less.
Okay, but if someone has, 4, 5, 3 NFTs, but if he holds in different wallets, so everyone will work as a kind of the first vote, the heavier votes.
Yeah, so Diego, that's something that we've talked a lot about, and like, there's different ways to address that, but none of them are really. The tech and the desire to make it civil resistance like that is not totally there yet. At least in terms of really easy implementation. I know, Michael, that you have some experience thinking about this stuff. What do you think?
Well, I think if we return to like the cost to reward model, I think that's kind of what came up in that discussion was the cost of spreading out all your DAOPunks. Is it worth gaining that much more vote? And given the value of our treasury, like, the cost to reward isn't worth doing. So we don't need to worry about that at this stage. At the point where our treasury is worth billions of dollars, then it's worth considering those kinds of things. But yeah, that's my thought.
Yes, same. For sure.
That makes sense. I understand.
Any other opinions on that, guys? I mean, you've missed a lot of these meetings. Not missed, but I mean, you weren't engaged in this way. We covered that stuff pretty hard, maybe back in December, and that was sort of what we decided.
Okay, interesting.
No, but it's a great point, right? I mean, leading with simple resistance first is not a bad place to come from. So, well, I mean, so Micah or anybody else who has opinions about this stuff, what do you guys think about, I mean, essentially trying to get the more basic stuff done first and then using this as sort of like, the roadmap and the master governance document that we continue to work on, long term. Like I said, guys, I'm easy, right? Like whatever you guys want to do, we can do. I just have my own opinions, obviously, but they're just that, right? It's just one person's opinion.
I mean, if we actually come up with the perfect governance framework now, what would be the purpose to have a governance working group moving forward? I don't know, just a question.
Yeah, I mean, you're never going to have a perfect governance framework, right? I mean, it's always going to be in a working group. I mean, I get my, more to the point again. Does it make sense to try to work through what we soft seshed and get that document done, or are we happy enough with the one-to-one and that solves enough problems? And then, we could keep the working groups we have now. We could really still fire for coordinate round, even though it wasn't, memorialized anywhere, and go forward. So.
That's what I think. I think we're pretty much stuck where we're at. We're never going to find the perfect system. It's going to be something that's going to have to be continually worked on going forward. It's just one of those issues that no one in humanity has figured out the perfect system yet.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I guess the question is, right, I mean, we want the system we have now, which is just one-to-one period, versus something that is what we talked about through these last couple months.
I would say
Also,
that... Go ahead, Mina.
Oh, no, go ahead. What I wanted to say is that it's also a matter of, do we really want to plan really far ahead when we have double the amount of active members and double the funds? And risk to affect the quality of the experience we have with the number of people we have right now and the number of treasury and really postpone everything? Or do we have to move forward with the resources we have right now and keep on working and try to keep in touch with the changes that happen in the DAO?
I don't think anybody's talking about postponing anything. It's just really about like, what do you want to work on the second iteration and then get that done? That's kind of more manageable in the short term versus, working on this master document until you kind of have that in the place where we like it. Micah?
Yeah, like the question is, what do we want to pass on our next snapshot, right? Like what's the most important thing? And it seems like having a basic working group model where contributors can be compensated through coordinate is a desire. So we can round off some, like the most simple working group model that we can come up with. And then another thing that I would want to have under the DAO voting section is how a DAO vote will be enacted specifically. So at least have in writing in the governance document, like who are the signatories, 3 out of these 5 need to sign. What's the expectation for them to execute the results of the vote? So like, how long do they have to do that? Like how much time do they have between when the vote goes through and when they need to actually fulfill that responsibility? That way signatories know like, okay, I need to be available to co-sign this when the proposal goes through. And we have like, everything is known. So it's really accessible and open and transparent as far as exactly where we're at right now.
Yeah. Cool. Anybody else?
Yeah, just a question on my side. I'm trying to understand if the governance framework forms a basis for a sort of constitution for the DAO.
Yeah, I think it does. What do you think?
Yeah, so what I was the reason I was asking that is because I was trying to understand. Um, I was doing a search for where it mentioned grants and trying to understand how, besides the voting, as well as the framework that's being decided around the working groups, how much of the content is built around the initial paragraph of the spirit and philosophy. I know, or at least I think I understand that what is being sort of listed and what we're trying to decide is how to actually form an operational structure to have the DAO up and running. But I didn't know how much of the content was built around that spirit and philosophy about equipping minds, hearts, and hands, and so on and so forth. This is why I was asking if it is more just the framework of operation.
Yeah, well, maybe Maiko wrote that, so I think that it attempts to capture the spirit of what we're doing. Maiko, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the spirit and philosophy, it needs input from other people. Like, it can't just be something that I wrote, because that's totally my approach. That's my approach to this organization. Like, for me, I see this as an opportunity to innovate in DAOs in general. Somebody else might see this as specifically trying to just give grants to people. Like, that's like the total goal for me. Like, included in our goal is to create an exemplar of how DAOs like can function. So if that's not true, if the majority of people don't see this that way, then that's not necessarily true to the spirit and philosophy of like what we're trying to do. Maybe we are just strictly trying to create the most efficient way to get grants out to people. And if that's true, we don't need to create like a trustless voting protocol or anything. But then we also aren't necessarily an exemplar for like the whole DAO community. So, I think the spirit of philosophy will evolve over time, and I would request like everyone here to kind of contribute to that section, either by just editing it or adding your own comments, and then we can change it. I'd be happy to like, if people just add their own little contributions, I'd be happy to try to distill everybody's into like a coherent paragraph right there if people want to just put in comments on that document.
Cool. I think one thing that is important to keep in mind, right, is I always go back to the manifesto, and so that's another way of like, what is your constitution? Well, I mean, right now, for DAOPunks, the manifesto is the constitution, kind of, right? And the lines in that stick out to me all the time are, we blaze new trails, we build bridges, we lead the way, right? And so to Michael's point about, well, sure, we could just be a DAO. And I mean, my personal opinion is you can be a DAO without having, automatic treasury triggers based upon snapshot votes. Although I understand that's one of many positions. I mean, by that definition, like almost nobody's a DAO, right? And so, if we're going to be, like Maiko says, an exemplar for the space of what a DAO should be, and, we're the punk ethos, right? So, I mean, we're going to do it, our fucking way. It doesn't matter what you think, and we're going to do it really good, you got to think about this stuff, right? And so I think that we should strive to be, the most DAO-ish DAO ever. And part of that, even though my initial instincts don't like this, is to automate some stuff I don't want to automate. And part of those things is automating treasury disbursements, right? Based upon snapshots. Now, like, the technology's not there yet. Like, there's no plugin for snapshot that can link up to your multi-sig and then execute transactions. But at some point there will be, right? And part of the conversation that you can't see, Joey, I don't think, because it's behind gated channels, is about trying to get some essentially a grant to build that thing out, from these various places that you can get grants from. So yeah, I mean, that's just it. We want to be the DAO, and even though like I go, God, what about security concerns about automating triggers? Well, what about security concerns about putting, some crypto in a urine ball? I mean, same stuff, right? People are getting rugged all the time. So it's an interesting balance. It's largely philosophical at this point, but you raised a great question. What's your constitution? And I think that it's the manifesto, and I think it's this document that we work on here. In some ways, it's like, the manifesto is the Constitution, and this is the Bill of Rights. If we're using American-centric kind of government documents, or you could find some other bad analogies, I suppose. But
thanks for clarifying. And Michael, thanks for saying what you said. I think first I need to. It's a very detailed document, and thanks for producing that. I think I need to read through it first, and then maybe, like you said, maybe give some feedback about what else maybe could be there from the little that I can understand of it. But thanks for the feedback.
I haven't read it all the way through either. You're not alone, Joey. So, there's a lot here, right? So, well, how do you guys want to move forward then? I mean, I keep on asking the same question, but I feel like I haven't really got a satisfactory answer yet. At least in terms of our scope of work in the short term. I don't know if you guys want to throw us a poll up, or you want to do it just, yay, nay, consensus now. I'm open.
I would maybe, Hiro, maybe you could give a description of your ideal working group model, and then I can work with that description to create the simplest, because like the working group model from Writers Guild is like very exhaustive, as far as like contingencies and everything go. I don't think we need that yet. We just need like a really basic outline. So maybe if you describe your basic outline for what you see for working groups, I can create like a very simple document that would be our next snapshot vote that we can look at and maybe discuss at our next meeting.
Yeah, no problem. And then to be double clear, like that model that we have been working on over, and guys, this is just for the Writers Guild within Bankless DAO. So but we are honestly like further ahead in governance than anything else in Bankless DAO, including like Bankless DAO generally. So that's actually not a working group model that's there. It's for elected role positions. And so, one thing that I'm pushing hard on a document that you haven't seen is to decentralize some of those roles, in particular talent scout and governance coordinator to be decentralized working groups. And there's some other places where I want to decentralize, but it's on that document. So what you have is actually like for elected role holders. And so it's not really a good framework period, for working groups, although you could certainly morph it into it. My vision on a really simplistic scale is not complex, right? So that was redundant. On a simple scale, not complex. Right now we have 3 working groups right now anyway, right? I mean, we have grants, governance, and treasury. They are open, meaning that anyone can join them or leave at any time. The way that you join one essentially is to raise your hand and say, I want to be on it. I give you a tag, and then you're part of the working group. And so, most of you here have multiple tags one way or the other. Joey, I'm totally down to tag you. I can't get you behind the gate, unfortunately, but we can be more mindful of tagging in the general channel so that you can see it. In fact, I'll make a note to make sure to do that, because normally I tag now behind gated channels. And so you have a working group. We have them, right? These are people who show up to regular meetings and participate. They're people who do work async if they're otherwise unable to participate in regular meetings. The thing that we don't have are nominally elected leaders. I mean, we have people who tend to lead this stuff. I mean, I tend to lead this, for lack of a better term. I would say Maddie Daddy tends to lead treasury, for lack of a better term, and probably like Stubbs or B. Pete's, leads grants, for lack of a better term. And so the place where we need to really focus is, what are the procedures for electing whatever word you want to use. A lot of people call people who lead working groups champions. We can call them something else. It doesn't really matter. It's just a word. I think, Mina, you had an idea for that word. I don't remember what it is offhand. And so, how does that election work in my mind? Iteration 1 is majority vote on a session pool. And that's it. So if you have, and removal the same way, majority removal on a sesh pool. Anybody can call for a sesh pool. We probably need to enable some permissions for non quote unquote leaders to be able to activate a session pool. I don't know if you need, I think you might need to have some level of Discord permissions to activate a sesh pool. We need to look into that. Hopefully, like if I were ever called to be removed, I'm not a dick, right? So like I would be happy to put up a poll for my own removal. But long term, we just don't know, right? And so you would need, to be able to distribute that power amongst the group somehow and have a mechanism for that. I do think it should be simple majority though, and no more complex than that. And it shouldn't require any kind of quorum to call it. I think that if one, I think that really like if this is a great question. If one person calls for the removal of a nominal leader, is that enough, or does it have to be, does that have to be seconded or thirded? Maybe that makes sense, just in case there's some weird social dynamics that happen. So we should think about how many people need to be, second team, if at all, to call for removal. But that's really it. The working group would be compensated every, you can say a time period, 6 weeks, say 2 months, 1 month, whatever we want to do. 1 month probably coordination-wise is maybe a little burdensome for coordinate. So say every 2 months you do a coordinate round, and that's how compensation works. There's no salaries for anybody. There's no set compensation for anybody. Leaders don't get anything more than anybody else. And so I think you keep all that flat and equal. And that's probably the really simple version of the thing in my head. Now I can like iterate on that forever, but that's really kind of it. Is there some other holes I'm missing? I'm probably forgetting some stuff, but that seems about right.
What do you imagine as far as so we have grants, governance, and treasury as separate working groups, and so how many roles do we need for each of those?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so I definitely want more than one. I think 5's too many. 2 or 3 feels about right. And I think we need to think about philosophically whether we want to have an odd number. I don't think that's necessary since leaders, champions, whatever, don't have any more authority than anybody else. I mean, they're just really, the people moving this mission forward because they want to be. And so I would say 2 would be sufficient. You could do 3, if you wanted to. But it's certainly more than 1.
Are we talking about the elected roles now, right?
Yeah, we're talking about the elected roles. And again, yeah, totally. But again, I mean, they're only like elected to the extent that, they're elected by the working group to make sure that there's progress being made every week or whatever our arbitrary timeline is. They don't really have any other special authority or anything besides that.
Well, they do have Discord permissions, right?
Well, maybe. Yeah, I mean, you would probably think so. That's probably a good point. I mean, if you were elected, would you have Discord permissions? Yeah, I guess you would.
And you said that like the elected roles are different from this, but it seems like they apply. Like the elected roles in the document that you gave me, seems like they can be adjusted to basically, apply to us.
Great. Yeah, my point was just that that document that you looked at, doesn't have a working group model in it. Like it is just for seasonal elections of role holders. And so when we built it, we weren't trying to build a working group model.
Okay, right. Well, you built the part of the model that includes elections, which is like a part of the working group model, right?
Totally.
Right. Okay. So then, what would you say is the part of the model that's missing, right? As far as like, what are the roles and responsibilities of those people?
Yeah. Was that a question? You got rugged, Micah. Was that a question? I missed part of what you said.
That was a question. I guess I'm just trying to get a sense of everything that we need to include in our.
Are you asking what are the roles and responsibilities of the leaders of the working groups?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that for governance, you want to be sure that you're current on the working version of the documents. You want I don't know, this is hard, guys. I mean, like, I think it's probably not really maybe this is what I would think, but I don't know. What is the role of those people, right? I mean, it's essentially to distill the essence of the working group and make sure that it's actionable. So I don't know what kind of language you want to use for that. Treasury is going to have different, roles than governance, right? And grants as well, And so I think that it might be easier, Michael, really just to like get some language down and we can tweak it. Just because, or we can ask, Daddy Matty or Stubbs or B Pete's or whoever wants to, provide that information, for those roles. I don't know how to. I mean, I'm a little bit remiss to want to describe what the role of the Treasury is, right? I mean, what are they going to be looking? I mean, they're going to, in some ways, be responsible for coming up with rebalancing ideas, et cetera, right? But are they, right? I mean, it might be a little softer than you're thinking, at least in my own head, which is like their real role is to, facilitate an open and moving dialogue about the documents you're working on. To always making them better, for perpetuity, and that goes with the grants framework. At some point, like the Treasury framework is pretty static, I think, but even then it should be looked at and iterated upon every so often. And so, I think it's about having that sort of, mindset that these documents are they're not finished, right? And they're always a work in progress, and we're always trying to make them better. We're always trying to keep it, within the spirit of our mission and philosophy. Whether that's the manifesto or some paragraphs before the governance document. I mean, that's what I see the role is. It's just, you're of course leading, right? But I mean, it's kind of like how I lead these things. I try not to lead like super dogmatically or anything. I just want to keep everything kind of organized and moving forward towards some goal. So like initially it was like the goal was, well, let's get an interim governance framework finalized and a snapshot. Now in my mind, the goal is, okay, well, let's make that happen for the second slightly better version of that, and then the goal is going to be, well, let's make that happen for the third slightly better version of that, and you're sort of always working at it that way, but also keeping the goal in mind of, at least for governance, like being the most sort of like progressive, dynamic DAO governance structure that we can possibly imagine. So I don't know how you write that though. You know what I mean? I mean, you could. Why don't you just put some drafts down, and then we'll just tweak it, and we'll get the relevant people in here to help refine that language. Am I looking at this wrong from your head, Micah?
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And I think we did a bit of work on this at our last governance meeting, because we had this discussion about like we had this great case study in like what happens when a working group leader like isn't officially recognized as the working group leader, like, and so they kind of like hand that down, and then the group is like, oh wait, we actually needed this person here, and now so we had that discussion
Right.
in the group about what is it that we actually need from like a working group leader. So I feel like I can condense some of that discussion into the next document. And yeah, I'll just draft something, keep it simple, and then I'll drop a link, and we'll get the input from each working group on what they need from their specific working group roles. And I don't know if we need to have that ready for this document, or if this one's gonna be a little bit more simple. We'll wait for their input for the next refinement.
Yeah, I think that's pretty easy language to get, at least for this first document. So I don't think it'll be an issue. And then really, like, I'm happy to do that to some extent too. But at least I'm good. I mean, I'm comfortable doing that for grants. I'm not that comfortable doing that for Treasury. I don't speak that language that well. But I would prefer someone who was really super grants focused, because honestly, like, I don't really want to. I don't want to lead grants, but maybe someone who wants to, or who naturally do that already, like Stubbs or B Pete's. I don't think B Pete's has the bandwidth, to be honest. Or Chaos is taking a pretty hard interest in that. He might be invested in that as well, So. I guess my point is, I think we can have descriptions in this more simple version.
Just one more question on my end, just regarding the electoral rules, and also we're talking about working groups. This question is coming also, I think, on the back of community call we just had in Bankless. So, to what degree are we either defining the skill sets or whatever prerequisites are needed for the roles based on sort of qualifications? I know it's a bit corporate, but are we considering that to some extent for those who may be elected or considered for those roles?
I don't think so. I mean, I'd be a little hesitant to put some kind of qualifications in. I mean, because really, right? I mean, it's going to be like more like who does the community of people who care about these things think should be the leader, right?
Right.
You know, more so than like what are your hard skills to lead, you know? So I guess I think about it that way, you know? I mean, another way to think about it is like, can you self-nominate, right? You know? But that's sort of a different discussion. So I would say none, you know? You know, one of the challenging questions, I guess, really like Joey would do, you know, it's like, you have to have a punk, you know, to be a leader. I mean, you can't see behind the gated channels where the stuff takes place, and so that's kind of self-limiting for you, which is sort of bullshit. And so, like, these are the things we'll have to think about, too. Like, do these channels come down, you know, behind the gate? Maybe, right? So, or in front of the gate, rather. So I think those are interesting questions to think about as well.
Sure. I mean, personally speaking, like, to be honest, I didn't have an idea that they were gated channels. But already it seems like there's so much activity happening. What I can see that's where I'm looking to contribute, like with the newsletters. So again, this was just coming back off the. I'm trying not to bring too much of the other stuff in here, but it was just something that since we're trying to sculpt based on our ethos, how we're looking to sort of run the DAO and also self-organize so that we can make the best out of organization. You know, be a DAO like no other. Perhaps it's something also to consider. You know?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one issue, like, you know, so in many ways, I think of ourselves as being like a distilled version of the best parts of Bankless DAO, right? But Bankless DAO is like a rudderless ship right now, to be honest, you know, and so they need people perhaps with more defined skills just because of the enormity of what they're trying to do and the size of the ship, right? And so, you know, when you're talking about like those GSE roles in particular, I think, you know, I think it makes more sense to have a set of hard skills that you bring to it or some real experience. But here, you know, this is an organically grown community that's really, you know, operates at a pretty high level already. I'd be hesitant to sort of like say, you know, you can't serve on this because you haven't done that. Versus I'm much more interested in the community thinks that you would be good to do this, and so you should.
Gotcha.
I mean, that's just my two bank, right? Like you know, I'm just spouting off opinions. There's a lot of ways to look at it.
Anyone else have ideas for the working group model that I can put into our next document?
Well, I think there should be a set of requirements for the leaders. Not very complicated, but I think someone who's the leader, I don't remember what word I said for them, so I'm going to use this word. Well, you have to be in tune with what's being discussed. You don't have to memorize everything, but you have to understand what are the difference of opinions in the group and try to encourage conversation during the meetings. If you're a leader, you probably cannot be passive on any of the working groups in the conversations, and you probably should be aware of how to lead the conversation. It's very brief, but I think it's important. So yeah, there should be some requirements, not necessarily qualifications, but requirements for this position. Because some people, for example, are very busy, so they might not be able to take on this job.
Yeah, a clear outline of responsibilities that they need to recognize before accepting a nomination. Maybe we could, if anybody has any other ideas as for what those responsibilities would be.
Yeah. I mean,
Go ahead.
No, please, I insist. I talk too much.
Well, you should know what's being talked about. So you should not necessarily be active, but you should be able to know what are the main discussion points that happen during the meetings and in the group chats. to be an issue with people who are not DAOPunks holders because the government is behind gated doors. That's something that needs to be known. I don't know if that's too formal, and I don't propose it in the hard way, but maybe be able to come with a small list of discussion points for the meeting based on the previous meetings and the discussion in the governance groups. So keep a little bit of a logical coherence in the conversations. And yeah, that's what I have by now, but I haven't put that much thought into it. I just think we should be able to tell people that's what you need to do, and you have to bear in mind that it has some requirements for deciding to propose themselves, for example.
Yeah, maybe we could figure out like an hours per week sort of estimate of how much time you would expect to spend, because sometimes people aren't very realistic with how much time they actually have available, or how much time it takes to do this kind of thing, to like write a document out and edit it and go talk to all these other people and keep up with the Discord. I mean, it's like many hours every week. So at least maybe we could put a number on that and just say, like, if you want to take this role, you need to commit to like this many hours a week, knowing that that may or may not be like fairly compensated hours. Hopefully it will be, right? But I also like what you were sharing about those responsibilities. I would personally summarize that as being a curator of memetics. I like that term, memetics, but I don't know if everybody's very familiar with it.
I'll have to Google that. But yeah, you were saying.
No. I was gonna ask Maiko to talk about memetics. I mean, you talked about it the other day. It's the real meaning of what memes come from, right? It's a fascinating word, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, Richard Dawkins invented the word meme. He's a geneticist, so he was actually creating a model for the way that ideas proliferate in a way that's actually similar to the way that life proliferates. And there's an evolution of ideas that works in a similar way of natural selection. And so the memetic lineage is just like being aware of how the ideas have changed over time. Like decentralization is a meme, right? And so being aware of that meme, not only as like what it means, but that many people have different definitions for what they think that means. So as the curator of memetics, you would be somebody who is not only up to date with where we're at now, but like where we've come from and where we're moving to, and is like not only asserting their own opinions on the group, but is rather sort of reflecting the way that ideas have transmuted by everybody, and sort of just trying to hold that vessel and like carry it forward and nurture it.
That's it. Well described.
Guys, I'm gonna have to shoot, but if there are any other things that I mentioned, maybe I'll be able to catch that up I'll read the governance document, and then maybe Michael, I could shoot you any ideas that I have, or are we allowed to edit directly on it?
You should.
All right, cool. Then I'll do that, and any doubts, I'll shoot you, Mr. Michael.
Yeah, great, awesome.
Okay, ciao, GM guys.
Take care, much love. Thanks for being here.
Cool. No, I think that's it. I would be a little cautious, Michael, about using memetics as a term within the governance document. Just because it's got a lot of weight attached to it, right? But it sure is a nice distillation of what we're trying to do here, and what a leader of a working group should be aware of. I mean, totally, right? I mean, the past, the present, the future. In the way that ideas, they rise and they fall. So, working group stuff, more things, working groups. That's probably a pretty good start for that, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. And I'll just spitball some ideas for like the responsibilities of the key holders to like execute snapshot votes, and we'll see what people think about it. Because I think there's just like some specific things, like how much time can pass between when a snapshot vote goes through and when like the cosigners really need to execute the action. I mean, and there's definitely some holes in it, right? But I don't think we're going to be able to seal those holes. But it's like you said, the election and removal of signatories is like a big deal. So we'll save that for next time. And then, yeah, like there's questions there, but I think just at least having like the bare minimum, like exact instructions for co-signatories when a DAO vote goes through, and I'll just write something simple in there.
I think that's cool. I mean, I'm on a bunch of multi-sigs right across our little ecosystem, and like, I would generally say that, if you're on a 3 of 5 multi-sig, there's 1 or 2 that aren't around, pretty regularly, right? And so, you might want to. I mean, my learned impression of multi-sig transactions is it probably takes a weekend to get it done generally. So it's like a 2-day thing before you get everybody, all 3 people to sort of see that it has to be done, that they hit approve, and that someone hits execute. Now, like, ideally, everyone's aware a snapshot concludes. They're on call to hit the button pretty quick, and you can turn it around pretty fast, right? But, I wouldn't keep that too short or too long. Like, you got to find that sort of sweet spot, right?
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I was going through the Uniswap documentation on their voting protocol, and it's really fascinating. Like, obviously they've sorted out like every conceivable contingency, and they've worked that into their model. So they have all these like time buffers, like all these very intricate like time buffers that have to do with like when something can be proposed and when people can actually vote on it, and then like a period of time after the vote goes through for when it's actually enacted, and all of that has like for security precautions, and it's pretty fascinating. If anybody's like interested, check out the Uniswap documentation, because they are like full on DAO, and they're really doing, they really are launching executable code from their DAO votes. And one like long-term solution could actually be to like fork Uniswap's voting platform instead of using Snapshot. But the other thing is that Snapshot like is pretty programmable, and you can install like executable code in there. So I don't know, this whole thing this past week has given me a lot more fuel to study on my like smart contract studying plan that I have, like to basically accelerate that, because I've just been feeling out like what is the most valuable contribution that I can make to the DAO sphere and to DAOPunks in general. And some of those thoughts have been like, oh, writing, art, like these kinds of things. But I'm starting to realize that I really need to like bust ass on smart contract programming, because it seems like it's very much needed.
Yeah, I have the similar thoughts, to be honest, Michael. Like, it is needed. And from my understanding is Snapshot runs, I mean, to a large extent on JavaScript too. And so that might be a place to kind of check out as well. So if you go into the GitHub section for Snapshot, there is like a lot of information to absorb there. It's a very fun place to play. You should join their Discord too. The Discord's good.
Cool.
There's also like another platform I became aware of the other day called Commonwealth, which integrates us, because one thing we don't have here that we need, right, is like a discourse, like a forum system. And it's just like on the list of things we need to do at some point, like along with a more robust Notion, or I actually hate Notion, but some people like it, and it seems to be the standard, at least for DAOs. But Commonwealth is something that I am meaning to check out, and I don't know the programmability of it in terms of doing treasury triggers, but it does integrate forums and Snapshot, which I think is, or forums and a voting mechanism, which I think is a really interesting concept. So that way you're not, sort of like having discussions and then also going over to Snapshot to vote. I also like, as a punk, right? Like, do we want to be using Snapshot, the industry standard for voting, or do you want something a little more, progressive and edgy? Just things to think about.
That's awesome. Yeah, that there's a question here outlined in the governance doc, which is like, how do we publish our governance framework and all of our procedural documentation such that the documentation is immutably adherent to the DAO votes that have elected them? Sounds like Commonwealth is doing that.
Yeah, they might be. I just haven't had a chance to dive into it yet.
Yeah.
And there's also like other, like servers we can use. They were talked about a bit, during that Bobby Hundreds AMA. I think you all were here for that. Were you here, Michael, for that? Maybe you weren't.
Yeah, I was here for that.
You were? Okay, good.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are interesting too, and I wrote the 3 down that they mentioned because I want to check those out as well. Because honestly, like, Discord's cool, but, is it the right option to use for us? I don't know. Maybe not, right? It's convenient for us because our life lives on Discord and all the other DAOs we play in. But is there a platform that works better for what we're trying to do? And the answer is yeah, maybe, right?
Totally.
So we're getting close to the top here. Action items. So it sounds like, Michael, you're going to maybe, are you going to split it into 2 docs so that we can have this beautiful work that you've done on this longer doc, and then maybe we can create a shorter doc that has the parts we want to kind of get up the snapshot next?
Yeah, I'm forking the doc, and the fork is going to be heavily simplified. So I'll just reiterate what I'm going to include in the simplified doc for snapshot. That's going to be the DAO voting that we've decided on already, and then I'm going to add the basic fact of what the current treasury management is with the 3 of 5 multisig, and then I'm going to have like a very basic working group model, and that's it. So
I think that's it, right?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, and to get back to your question about like what are the qualifications, because it is important, right? And maybe I'm downplaying that a bit, but you're right. I mean, you gotta be able to attend the meetings. You got to be familiar with the document. You got to actively participate in the crafting of the document. You got to be an active member of the DAO. You got to contribute regularly across the DAO. I think all those are important. Like, you wouldn't want someone, on grants who like pops in for grants and then takes back off for a week and then pops back in for grants and takes back off, right? And so I think you have to have a continual level of engagement. I don't think we should make it a specific, say you need to post 23 different, 23 different, chat text entries per week or something. But
well, we could be specific enough to say that you should read all comments in your respective channel.
Right, I agree. But do you need to respond to them all? Maybe. But that might be a little bit too managerial. So, I'm mindful of like the soft power that some of us can wield and the influence that we can have over people just by the nature of who we are and what we do. And so I don't think it's always appropriate to comment, right? Like, I mean, I have intentionally not commented on a lot of that governance stuff because I don't want to sway it, right? And I'm not saying like I have all this power, but, for better or for worse, I'm looked to in a particular way in this community as having some sway, right? But you got to be careful how you use it. You don't want to overuse it or underuse it. So there's a fine balance there,
Yeah, it's like one of the duties is to actively distribute power because, like Stubbs was saying, there's a tendency for power to centralize. So you have to continually work to decentralize power.
Yeah.
That might be worth including.
I think that probably is. I mean, it's something that I certainly actively try to do. I mean, I tried to do that, and it kind of, what we saw what happened, right? I mean, things kind of stopped for a week. But we also didn't have that mindset maybe in place that we were ready for that, But yeah, I think always working to decentralize. And again, like my new theory is like, the antithesis of decentralization is not like the flattening of hierarchy, it's the empowerment of individuals and giving them agency to act, right?
Yeah, and I'm serious. Like, I don't know if you saw my comment, but like, can we get Joey a punk because like we could kind of use the contributors,
No, I know, and so that's like another thing. Like, I agree, and so like how does that work? I mean, there's no punk like sitting out there, right? So someone's got to go buy it off the floor
Yeah.
and then give it, and but yeah, that's it.
I mean, if we introduce a token system, people who are non-DAOPunks holder could still get access to those channels by having a certain amount of tokens.
Well, that's right.
Could be
So,
a long-term solution.
no, but that's kind of where I want to head too. I mean, I think the natural evolution of this is to end up with a governance token, for that reason. And also, I think it's super important to disalign, the economic incentives of holding an NFT versus, the way that we govern this thing. And that only works if you have a governance token. And I actually think you should have a governance token that has no value, that isn't something you can put into a liquidity pool and try to sort of gamify it to increase the value of it. I would want a token that has no value, that probably burns all the way every so often, and then it's redistributed by airdrop. But those are obviously again, sort of more long-term governance thoughts.
That's interesting. Yeah. In your that NFT that you bought from me, there was a unlockable content that was this chart of some of my brain explorations of DAOs early on when I was thinking about it. And one of the things is that makes a DAO really powerful is the ability to mint your own token, and then because you can do that, you can architect your own incentive structure. So I've been super fascinated by the Graph protocol because of the way that they've used their proprietary token to incentivize this whole working system that's a well-lubricated machine. It's totally beautiful. So I appreciate the perspective of not wanting the governance token to have value, because it creates this toxic culture in a lot of ways, but then also you gain the ability to compensate people with a token that represents a stake in the project, that even if it doesn't really have that much value, it's it's fun to pass around and it feels good to receive. And yeah, I think that's a really cool thing.
Can I drop the unlockable content? I think I'm the only person who's ever seen it.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can, but it wasn't intended to be public. If I were gonna share it with the public, I'd make a lot of changes to it, because it's not really refined, or even it's not even accurate in some ways. So but if you get value out of it, you think somebody else is going to get value out of it, sure. But I'll maybe I'll work on an updated version.
It's super cool though, right? I mean, it's this hand drawn thing, guys, that has these different ideas on it, and there's some color, and it's super neat.
I don't know if you caught it, but in there is this conceptualization of basically I see the forest and ecosystems in general as decentralized collaboration systems, and so I created 5 aspects of a DAO that make a DAO what a DAO is, and then I was if this is true, then what how does nature fulfill these same aspects? And basically the blockchain protocol is DNA, and the consensus mechanism is actually the process of mating and having sex to create forks of those protocols. And the process of the token itself is carbon and the carbon cycle. And what is it anyway? Yeah, no, it was super, super funny. But I'd love to elaborate on it. Maybe that's fuel for another.
It's super cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, for another
Sounds
day.
very trippy. I like it.
Fun, totally
Yeah,
creepy.
It is a little trippy. It's cool though. I mean, yeah. I mean, I think it's pretty funny, because I think a lot of us are kind of hippie punks, right? Hippie techno punks. I've always kind of lived that hippie life to some extent, and so it's pretty amusing that we find ourselves amongst ourselves yet again in the metaverse.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Surviving factor tribe.
You do. I mean, there's all this stuff that happens, all this energy that flows around that we're only sort of a little bit aware of on our conscious mind, right? But I can tell you in my short time in the space, these last 4 or 5 months, there's a universal alignment happening behind us, whether we realize it or not. And I think some of us see it and some of us don't, but it's happening regardless.
Nice.
Well, so on that, how fun was this? I love governance. I love you all. Have a fabulous weekend wherever you are. Mina, you might actually be into your weekend already. Thanks for staying up late for us. And
Oh, no need to worry. I have 4 more hours. Cool.
okay, so it's only 8 o'clock for you. And so, thank you everybody for your time and attention, for your contributions to everything we're working on here. And I can't imagine being on this journey without you. So thank you.
Much love, folks.
Lovely to speak with you all. As always, have a lovely weekend, guys.
All right, until next
And I
week.
hope you're feeling better, for whatever it's worth,
Don't even get me started on how my morning was.
Fair enough.
It's fine. It's fine. All right, guys. Bye-bye.
Cheers, friends.
Ciao.